All right, hello everyone and welcome. If you're prepping for any competitive exam, you know there are some topics that are just absolute must-knows. Well, the Revolt of 1857 is right there at the top of the list. Today, we're going to break it all down exam style. We're talking key concepts, the names you need to remember, and the analysis that's going to help you ace this topic. So let's dive right in. So here's our game plan for today. First, we'll look at the immediate spark that set everything off. Then we'll dig deep into the fuel that had been building up for years, the real underlying causes. After that, we'll trace the major events of the rebellion, analyze why it ultimately didn't succeed, and finally explore its huge, lasting legacy. Honestly, this structure is a fantastic way for you to organize your own notes. Okay, let's get into Section 1, the spark. How did this massive, sprawling revolt actually get started? After decades of simmering anger, what was the one thing that finally lit the fuse? And right off the bat, we're hit with a classic historical debate, and it's a huge one for essay questions. Was this just a sepoy mutiny, as British historians first called it, trying to downplay it as a small military affair? Or was it, as Indian nationalists later argued, the first war of independence? Getting a handle on this debate is absolutely key to framing your answers well. And that question leads us right to this core definition. The Revolt of 1857 was so much more than a simple mutiny. We're talking about a massive, widespread uprising. It pulled in people from all walks of life, and it was all fueled by this deep, complicated mix of grievances against the East India Company's rule. Now, while there were tons of reasons people were angry, the immediate trigger, the one event that made everything explode, was the introduction of a new piece of military gear, the Enfield rifle. But, it wasn't the rifle itself that was the problem. It was all about the ammunition. Okay, so here's the deal. To load this new rifle, a sepoy, an Indian soldier, had to literally bite off the end of the paper cartridge. The rumor that spread like wildfire was that these cartridges were greased with cow and pig fat. For Hindu soldiers, the cow is sacred. For Muslim soldiers, the pig is unclean. This was seen as a direct, deliberate attack on their faith. So when soldiers at Meerut refused to use them and were harshly punished, that was it. The rebellion began. So let's move on to our second section. You see, those cartridges were just the spark. A spark can't start a massive fire without a whole lot of dry fuel. And for decades, the British had been piling it up. To really get 1857, we have to look at these deeper, long-term causes. Now, for your exams, and this is super important for structuring your answers, it's incredibly useful to sort all these causes into 4 big buckets: political, economic, social, and religious, and, of course, military. Using this framework will help you make sure you hit all the key points. Okay, first up, the political causes. You have to remember, the East India Company wasn't just some trading firm anymore. They were aggressively expanding, taking over territory, and that was a direct threat to the power and even the existence of India's princes and kings. And the big one here, the term you absolutely have to know, is the doctrine of lapse. This was Lord Dalhousie's policy. Basically, he said that if an Indian ruler died without a direct male heir, their kingdom would just lapse. It would be taken over by the British. This is what happened in places like Jhansi. This policy, along with just outright annexations, created a whole class of angry, powerless, and unemployed former rulers and their soldiers. All right, next up, let's talk about the money, or really, the lack of it. British economic policies were systematically taking apart the traditional Indian economy, and it hurt everyone, from the farmer in the village to the craftsman in the city. You see, it was like a 1-2-3 punch to the Indian economy. First, crazy high land taxes were crushing the peasants, forcing them into debt and off their land. Second, cheap factory-made goods pouring in from Britain were wiping out entire industries like weaving. The result of all this? Widespread poverty and a whole lot of very desperate, very angry people. Now, this next part is really personal. It's about culture and religion. A lot of Indians started to believe that the British didn't just want their land. They wanted to erase their entire way of life. And this is a tricky one because some of the things the British did, like banning the practice of sati, we might see as progressive today. But back then, to many conservative Indians, it felt like a direct assault on their most sacred traditions. You combine that with the work of Christian missionaries and the introduction of Western education, and it created this powerful fear that their very culture was under attack. Okay, so we know the why. Now let's get into the what. Section 3, let's follow the action as it unfolds. How did this single mutiny in Meerut turn into a rebellion that engulfed much of North India? Just look at how fast this all happened. The soldiers rebel in Meerut on May 10th, and then they do something brilliant. They march straight to Delhi. By capturing the old Mughal capital and getting the elderly Emperor Bahadur Shah II to be their symbolic leader, they instantly gave the uprising a sense of legitimacy. This wasn't just a mutiny anymore, it was a full-scale rebellion with a figurehead. Okay, screenshot this, write it down, do whatever you need to do, because this table is pure gold for your revision. You have to know these names and places. You've got Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi freeding because of the doctrine of lapse, Nana Sahib in Kanpur. These were the heroes of the rebellion, the local leaders who rallied people to the cause. And that leads us to the big, analytical question, the one you're almost guaranteed to see on an exam. If this revolt was so huge, so passionate, and so widespread, why did it ultimately fail? Well, the answer really comes down to this side-by-side comparison. On one hand, you have the rebels. They had incredible bravery, but they had no single unified leader. Different leaders in different places were often fighting for their own goals with very little coordination. On the other side, you have the British. They had a clear chain of command, better weapons, and two huge technological advantages: the telegraph, which let them communicate instantly, and the railways, which let them move troops incredibly fast. Plus, many powerful Indian princes actually sided with the British, which was a massive blow to the rebellion. So the revolt is crushed, but this is where the story gets really interesting. Things did not just go back to normal. In fact, the revolt triggered a massive change in how Britain governed India. This was the end of one era and the beginning of a whole new one. And the biggest, most immediate change? The Government of India Act of 1858. You have to remember this. The British government basically decided that a private company couldn't be trusted to run an entire subcontinent anymore. So they abolished the East India Company's rule, and India was brought under the direct control of the British Crown. This is the official start of what we call the British Raj. And you can see the whole British strategy shift. No more grabbing land, at least not in the same way. But, and this is so important for what comes later, they doubled down on their divide and rule policy. They deliberately played on religious and caste tensions to make sure Indians would never unite against them like that again. And for good measure, they exiled the last Mughal emperor, ending the dynasty for good. But here's the thing. It's easy to look at this and call it a total failure. But that's not the whole story. Not at all. Because even though it was crushed, the memory of 1857, the memory of Hindus and Muslims, princes and peasants fighting together against a common enemy, it planted the seeds of a new idea, the idea of an Indian nation. It became a powerful source of inspiration for all the freedom fighters who came later. So, I'll leave you with this question to think about. The rebellion was put down, and British rule seemed stronger than ever. But as we look ahead to the next phase of Indian history, the long struggle for independence, we have to ask, the fire of the revolt was extinguished, yes, but did the embers of that memory, of a united struggle for freedom, ever truly go cold?